Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Serena, and in today's video we're going to be sewing up a 1950s/1960s inspired pajama set. I need to start prioritizing spring and summer pajamas because the only time I ever seem to make them is around Christmas time, so then that leaves my wardrobe lacking warm weather pajamas for sleeping as well as lounging. This month's Patreon exclusive was me sewing up a baby doll styled pajama set, and so I will leave a link to that video if you'd like to become a bobbin and see that video. I found a pattern online. I think it was either Pinterest or Etsy. Either way, I found this pattern online and I really liked it, and I was so close to buying it, but I am still trying to work through my stash and things like that, so I decided not to purchase it, but instead to try and figure out making it with patterns that I already have. So I did do that, and I used 3 different patterns to make it. So I'm going to share with you guys the process of making the pattern that I actually wanted, all the patterns that I used to create it, and all the modifications that I made to make it work for what I wanted it to be. I'm so excited for this. Thank you guys so much for supporting my very last video. It's doing so well. I truly appreciate it. That overskirt was a killer for that outfit, and I'm so glad that you liked it as well. I hope that you guys will make some overskirts of your own and tag me in photos on Instagram if you do make them. It is super easy, so I want to kind of stay on trend with having some quicker projects, especially for the summertime, because I feel like a lot of us are trying to be outside of the house and not necessarily inside. I know that I am. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Instagram if you want to see what I'm up to in real time. I do a lot of gardening in my stories over there, so you can keep up with how my garden is coming along. If you would like to become a bobbin and see some exclusive content, you can go ahead and join my Patreon, and the link will be down below. I do have some Pyrex inspired images that you can download and cut files and things of that nature. So a lot of little extras over there, and I also do some sneak peeks as well. If you'd like to support this channel any further, you can leave me a virtual tip on Ko-fi. Now let's get into the materials and the patterns. For the patterns, I'm using McCall's 3035 for the yoke portion, for the yoke front and back, and I modify that. And then I also use Simplicity 6831 for the lower bodice part because it's kind of cropped. And for the pants, I'm using 4221. Now for the materials, the main pajama is going to be made out of this mint green seersucker, and then I'm going to accent the yoke with this scrap lace that I had in my stash. And then moving on to the trim, I'm using this hand torn floral trim and a little bit of this cotton eyelet for additional trim because I ran out. I'm cutting the yoke out of the lace, and the only adjustments that I made to the yoke was to reduce the width of the shoulder. The original pattern was a bit too big for me, plus it spanned over several sizes, so I had to make some adjustments there. And then I cut out the front yoke, which has a self-facing on it, and then I have to interline this with some basic cotton, which I am doing here. I originally bought this lace as a remnant, and I've used it for at least 3 projects for like collars and things like that. So this is the final use of this fabric. I'm glad to see it go. Now it's time to add the ribbon to the yoke. This is supposed to be done last in the instructions, but I'm going to do it now so that way I don't see the stitching on the other side. So it's nice and hidden underneath the facing. As I'm working on different sections of this project, I'm going to pop in a photo of the reference so that way you guys can keep up with what parts that I'm replicating at what point. The pattern that I'm using to get the yoke, McCall's 3035, has 2 ribbons to close the yoke, and I'm only going to go with 1 because that's what was on my reference photo. So instead of the second ribbon, I'm going to use a hook and eye to keep the chest closed. Now it's time to move on to the second pattern I'll be using for this project, and it is Simplicity 6831, and I'm using it to get the flouncy top of the bodice. I am adding 2 inches to the folds of the back and front piece so that way it's more gathered in the upper bust and upper back portion. To be clear, this was optional. I could have just used the original bodice and shortened it. So technically you could have gotten away with just using the 2 patterns, the very first one that I showed, and then the pattern for the pants, or any pattern that you have for the pants. So now I'm adding 2 long stitches for the gathering, And after cutting out all the pieces from the patterns you want, you can pretty much follow the instructions for the very first pattern that I used to assemble it if you might be a little confused on how to put it all together, because after you get the pieces you want cut, it's pretty much the same assembly. And now I'm attaching the back piece to the back yoke using my gathered sides on the top, so that way I can adjust the gathers as I sew and get everything evenly distributed and I don't end up with tiny pleats in the fabric. Because the blouse opens at the neck with a tie, you're going to want to add a placket to the blousey portion of the top so it can pull over your head comfortably. So I'm cutting out a little piece and I'm going to interface around the stitching line so that way it reinforces and holds the stitch. And so we're going to go around and sew on that marking and then cut down the center and turn that to the wrong side. So right now I'm stitching on the right side of my pajama top. Before I stitched this down, I realized that the placket was too long because this was intended for a longer nightshirt or nightgown. It would have ended up into the center of my blouse, so I did shorten it. And I also want to recommend that you use the tightest stitch to sew this down, so that way it really holds and secures that stitch when you flip it inside out. Once your placket is in and secured, it is time to add your gathering stitches to both the left and the right side of your bodice, and then you attach it to the yoke portions, very similar to how you would have done it on the back. Just like the back, I attach the gathers with the gathered side upward, adjusting as I stitch, and this is the best way that I find to attach my bodices or gathered skirts to waistbands and things of that nature, because you get the most control. And as you can see, the placket is opened up so that way it matches the lace portion of the yoke, and the reason the lace extends beyond the placket is because I didn't hem that lace portion just yet, and I'll do that later. And after that is attached, it's time to attach the shoulders of the bodice front and the bodice back, leaving the side seams open because this is going to be a sleeveless bodice. So I'm going to go in with some single fold bias tape and close up the armholes later, and that's always easiest to do if you leave the side seams open first. The bodice is almost done, and it's time to attach the armhole facing so that way, or the bias tape, so that way you can close up the side seams and hem it. So one of my tricks to getting your bias tape to lay flat every time is to iron your bias tape into the shape of the armhole before attaching it. Once the armholes are finished, I move on to closing up the side seams with French seams because I think it looks really nice and clean on the inside. And then I move on to adding my trim. This trim has also been in my stash for quite some time. I got it on clearance for, I think, 90 something cents. And so it's finally come in handy. However, because it was a clearance trim, I can't purchase it anymore. I used all that I had and then I ran out. So I used this for the bodice, the armholes, and then the neck. The trim should also match on the pant, but I had to use a different style trim for that. And now it is time to close up the neck holes. So they did have a facing with the original, the first pattern that I used, the McCall's. And so I just used the exact same facing for the pattern, since I did not change the yoke very much. And it was very close to the original yoke from the McCall's pattern. So once I sew that in and turn everything right sides together, I go ahead and add that neck trim as well. It's time to move on to the pants. So I'm going to use Simplicity 4221 for this. This was a brunch set, so the pants do have a little bit more ease than a normal pant does. It has a fitted waistband, but if you're more comfortable with an elasticized waistband, then you can make the adjustments for that. I just omitted the zipper because a lot of my vintage pajama patterns do not have a side zip and just close at the waistband. Apart from the zipper, the next adjustment I made to these pants was to shorten it, and so I just measured my legs and stopped the length where I felt like it'd be most comfortable. So I wanted it to be just below the knee but right before the calf, and that's where I ended it. Apart from those minor adjustments, I just follow the directions of the pattern the way that pants are usually put together, except for when it comes to the opening where you would put a zipper, I just use some handmade bias tape that matched the fabric, and I sewed on the bias tape to cover the raw edge, and that's what I did here. Once you attach the waistband, you're going to want to add a button. I prefer a button on my pajama pants as opposed to a hook and bar, but you can also do that as well. Now that the video is nearing the end, I would like to thank you all for joining me as I close this gap in my wardrobe. If you're interested in seeing more pajama slash loungewear content, this month's Patreon video was making a baby doll pajama set and it is live. Click the link in the bio and become a bobbin today for exclusive content. As the temperatures start to heat up, I will be venturing into thinner and smaller garments, so more play sets, rompers, and things of that nature, and they will tend to be more beginner friendly, so I can spend more time outside having fun and less time inside, as mentioned at the beginning of the video. So for all my beginners out there, I should have some projects that you can easily tackle. As for my garden, I do upload a lot of content to my Instagram stories about my gardening, and then I've also been adding some content to my YouTube stories. So if you didn't know, YouTube has their own version of stories, and you can see what I'm up to in real time, but also follow me on Instagram at SewRena_. Liking, sharing, and leaving a comment is still the very best way to support my channel, so if you don't mind, give this video a like and share it. Also, tell me what you think about this pajama set. What are you guys up to? What are you sewing? Let me know. I'd love to read it. If you would like to support this channel any further, you can leave me a virtual tip over on Ko-fi. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful and safe weekend and holiday if you are in the US. See you in the next one. Bye.